Now, Ukraine went through what many see as one of its worst years in decades. The ongoing fighting and a conflict that widened the East-West divide has hit the country's economy, making its currency the worst performer this year. Yusra Mehdi with more.
2014, a year described by many as Ukraine's worst year since World War II. It saw a rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in a conflict seen as the most dangerous to grip Europe since the wars in the former Yugoslavia. Continuous fighting and violence in the east has taken the lives of over 4,700 people and driven over 500,000 from their homes. Driven by an ever-growing East-West divide, from a Western-backed Euromaidan movement that ousted former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, to an eastward uprising against the government that replaced Yanukovych in Kiev. But this East-West divide is not just on the domestic level. Internationally, Ukraine's political crisis sowed the seeds for one of the worst diplomatic tensions between the West and Russia since the Cold War. Superpowers used the annexation of Crimea and the fighting in eastern Ukraine between separatist and government troops to justify both tit-for-tat sanctions against Russia and a buildup of forces around Ukraine and Eastern Europe. And this political struggle brought with it one of the worst years Ukraine has dealt with economically too. The country's central bank chief said yesterday the economy contracted by 7.5% this year. Bearing the brunt of the slowing economy and the high inflation rates is the Ukrainian hryvnia, making it to the top of the charts as the worst performing currency this year.
I would like to again repeat that we will never again live with a fixed exchange rate of hryvnia. Our task now is to move to real care of the stability of prices. This is what so-called inflation targeting is.
Ukraine's rising debts due to an escalating gas dispute with Russia have also added to the pressure. Analysts say that in the middle of political tensions this year, Ukraine has been the biggest loser.
It's just diplomatic rhetoric or moral support for President Petro Poroshenko. It's like they are saying, OK, we will help, we will impose sanctions. But I don't think this kind of moral support is what Poroshenko really needs. What he needs is financial support, coal and natural gas, since Ukraine is currently facing an energy shortage problem.
As Ukraine turns its back to one of the most overwhelming and difficult years in decades, and as it enters 2015, carrying with it the heavy load from 2014, hopes are hanging on fragile peace talks to bring about political stability and prosperity to its ailing economy.
Yes, to discuss this issue of Ukraine with us further is political analyst William Spring, who joins us in London on Skype. Now, William, thank you very much for joining the bulletin. Firstly, it has been a year to forget for Ukraine, starting from Yanukovych's decision to back away from closer ties to the EU. Now, how significant was that decision in light of events that followed?
Well, and that decision was the catalyst or the excuse for the Euromaidan protests to begin. And honestly, I do genuinely think that the people at Euromaidan were extremely deluded, because if they think that the European Union is going to bring some sort of paradise to Ukraine, they are wrong. Anyone who knows the European Union, who has lived in it for any length of time, as I have, knows that the European Union is a completely corrupt body, unable to deliver anything except unemployment and high inflation to the citizens of Europe. Okay, it's delivered something to Germany, but Germany is now paying a heavy price for that. So the Euromaidan protesters were extremely deluded to get involved in this false belief. What they should have done is sought to make bridges with the government and actually try and find a way through. But the problem is the Americans were behind the Euromaidan protests. Now, the Americans are never satisfied until until they go for broke. There are too many people losing face in Washington. So consequently, what's happened is Washington has directed the policy. The EU has gone along with that policy, including Chancellor Merkel, who is really quite extraordinary that she should plunge Germany into an unnecessary economic crisis over the Ukraine, and who, as a chancellor, is reviving the ancient Teutonic Slav feud, which was exploited by Adolf Hitler.
William, many are blaming Russia for their role in the conflict. Do you agree?
Of course not. The problem is the people who are blaming Russia are the mainly American media, the British media, such as Sky News, the British corrupt, broken politicians, such as Nick Clegg, David Cameron, and David Miliband. It's always a useful thing to blame Russia. They have to have someone to blame for their own failures as statesmen. There is no way this situation should have been allowed to escalate to the degree it has. Russia wanted simple guarantees of neutrality from the Ukraine. If those had been given, that would have been fine. But EU and NATO said, no, we'd rather kill thousands of people in the east. The EU and NATO are a bloodthirsty mob, very similar to ISIS, seeking to destroy and kill as many people as they possibly can in ethnic cleansing of the Slavs in the east of Ukraine and elsewhere in Ukraine. They want to break all the traditional ties between Russia and Ukraine. And it's a considerable failure of statesmanship, as Kissinger has pointed out.
Right.
And he knows about great power politics.
Now, how much has Ukraine suffered from the Russian-US tensions? How much has Ukraine suffered from that, William?
Well, I think that's coming out in the current situation over, for example, the nuclear power plant that is evidently not being properly maintained because its levels of radiation is 17 times higher than it should be. We could have another Chernobyl on our hands overnight. All we hear is, oh, everything's fine from the Ukrainian government, but that's not good enough. We've seen the Ukrainian incompetence before in 1989, and many people are bearing that price. In terms of economic loss, then, of course, the breadbasket of the industrial heartland of Ukraine has been wiped out by the fighting. All you've got are in Kiev are mobsters, right sector spivs, as we used to call them, who are making money on the side. This is no recipe for prosperity for a country at all. And they should have sought to keep Ukraine together in some way so that the economy could be built up. This is a period of great recession and difficulty in Europe. Another odd thing is Lithuania joining the EU when the EU is already broke. Why should they do that? This is power politics. America pushing EU to the limit to get right up against the fence with Russia with a view to eventually attacking Russia. I think that's what's the agenda behind it. These are just preliminary moves.
We're just going to have to leave it there, William. Thank you very much for your time.